Let's also discuss the UK's fintech environment ahead of the spring budget. My next guest is a co-founder and chief executive of Oak North Bank, a digital business bank for entrepreneurs. Now, as Labour tries to revive London's struggling listing market, Oak North has recently expanded its US presence by acquiring a Michigan-based bank. Well, Chief Executive Rishi Khosla joins us now. Rishi, thank you so much for joining us. Now, first, I want to start about the UK, and then I want to ask you why you're so attracted by the US lending market. But are you frustrated with the UK market? We have a new government in place. There's been a bit of up and down. There's the threat of tariffs. It doesn't look like it's a pretty picture.
So look, we set up Oak North really to help entrepreneurs, right, starting here in the UK. Over the last 9.5 years, we've helped create something like 56,000 new jobs through the lending that we've done to entrepreneurs in the UK. I think fundamentally the way to have a positive environment in the UK is to have growth. The best way to have growth is to have the human capital which drives growth, i.e. the entrepreneurs, right? So creating an environment which is very fertile to actually attract global entrepreneurs to come and set up in the UK, in various cities in the UK, in the same way that you have almost a dozen cities around the world which are setting up their stall to attract those entrepreneurs. I think that's what the UK needs to do much more of. It needs to lean significantly more into that contingent. And again, very specifically, I would call out those growth entrepreneurs versus the CEOs of big PLC type multinational companies, because the level of productivity gains that they give when they come in and invest is significantly smaller, although the dollars may be larger.
But, Rishi, I mean, this is a problem, is that actually there was so much in the autumn statement from the government that it's unclear whether they're entrepreneur-friendly or not. Just they're trying to do things like, cutting planning, making things quicker, trying to revive growth, even, putting pension funds to put more money in UK companies, the smaller UK companies. At the same time, they increase NICs. So do you think they're business-friendly?
I mean, overall, you come out of the autumn statement and it's hard to say they're business friendly, right? I mean, absolutely trying to unlock the pension money to come into private companies, great. But over what period? Over 3, 4, 5 years? I mean, the challenge in terms of some of the measures from the autumn statement is that you cause an exodus of entrepreneurs out of the country, right? And you're telling global entrepreneurs that the UK is somewhat indifferent, right, or arguably even worse, to actually attracting you to come and establish your businesses here or grow your businesses here. Whereas I think we know what we need to be doing exactly the opposite. And, I'm forever the optimist, so maybe there's something tomorrow.
But do you think, again, have you seen an exodus of entrepreneurs saying, look, I'm going to look for capital elsewhere, I'm going to be... I mean... Is it easier 100%. To do a business in the US?
There are so many cities, again, I specifically call out cities versus countries, cities which are setting up stall, right, to attract those entrepreneurs, and whether that's Milan, whether that's Abu Dhabi, whether that's Singapore, whether that's various US cities, New York, Miami, etc., Austin. Like, there is a lot of incentives and effort going in by those cities to attract those entrepreneurs. And do we see them leaving from the UK? I mean, the stats, I think, which are shared from Henley and Partners at least, shows that the UK had the largest loss of millionaires after China. And obviously, we're sort of, a 20th of the population, if not less, of China. So that's a pretty stark stat.
Rishi, does that hurt how much does that hurt your business actually in the UK? I know you're also looking at, listings. What would it take for you to list here?
So look, we continue to grow here in the UK. We continue to support British entrepreneurs, right? In terms of overall size of our business today, compared to market size, we're less than 1% of the market. So our ability to continue to grow, and there will always be great entrepreneurs to support, and we're there to support them. So does it hurt the business? I would say it doesn't hurt the business. We continue. And yes, we are expanding in the US, right? And we have been over the last 2 years or so. And that continues to go incredibly well. In terms of listing, who knows?
Who knows? Very diplomatically put, you recently acquired Community Unity Bank. This is a U.S. bank with a license. Why buy a bank with a license instead of looking for your own U.S. license?
So number one, we signed the deal subject to regulatory approvals. Okay. So closing will be whenever we go through, get past the regulatory approval process. Why buy a U.S. bank rather than go through a de novo process? Fundamentally, we found a relatively small bank which had an excellent team, which had already gone through the process and had just a very aligned culture and view of the world. And therefore, that acts as a small springboard to our plans. Fundamentally, I think the simulation of that team into our culture is one which is going to be easy and therefore very logical.
Rishi, what's drawing you to the U.S. market right now, given these tariffs and some of the uncertainty surrounding the U.S. market globally? I have to say, but also the U.S.
I was
market.
going to say, look, we started the business in September 2015. There's only been uncertainty, like obviously with Brexit in the UK, and then all the way through to today. So living in an uncertain environment, I think, is just the new norm. And fundamentally, if you look at the US market, it's over $4 trillion versus like $500 billion in the UK for us. So in terms of just general market size, it makes sense to play that. And also the US has evolved in terms of moving away from pure bank funding. And as Oak North, combining private credit, fintech and commercial banking elements for our customer base, it's sort of the US is a market which already accepts alternative finances. So ultimately, a great place for us to expand.
How much do you want to grow in the US?
A lot.
What's a lot?
I mean, look, we've been, if you look over the last several years, the business has been growing about over 20% a year very consistently. Yeah. Right? I think our baseline is to continue that growth profile over the next years. Obviously, that means much higher growth in the US comparatively off a smaller base. So continuing that overall trajectory.
But is it because you actually found a gap in the offering, or is it because you just think the pie will grow for everyone?
There's absolutely a gap. In the whole idea behind setting up Oak North was the fact that banks generally focus very well on either retail customers and consumer customers and micro businesses and or large businesses. And in the middle, you get this whole contingent which just gets, in a way, underserved, overlooked. And it's that market, the lower middle market, the missing middle, which is our core focus. And that's the same in the UK, it's the same in the US, it's the same in pretty much every market. So there is a gap, and ultimately that gap, in our view, is the highest productivity element of any economy, because that's where the growth businesses are.
Yeah, I mean, again, in the middle of tariffs, it's not an obvious choice, right? It's a brave choice, I would say.
Setting up the third new bank in 150 years in the UK was a relatively brave choice. So,
what surprised you the most since you set it up?
You know, it's just been the ease of actually getting into the market and the velocity under which we've been able to build. So we are already about 3 times the original plan that we expected in the US. So just the velocity of activity in the US is just very significant, even in environments which are bumpy. Like just the entrepreneurial spirit, those animal spirits are just so strong.
I know you won't say much, but are you thinking about IPOing, or is it not, one of your priorities at the moment?
Look, the last time we raised equity capital was 6 years ago. We've been profitably funding our growth ever since, and really since we started the business. So it's not an imperative.
And the markets is volatile. I mean, does that come into your thinking, or also your clients' thinking? I
mean, look, the way the public markets have evolved over the last decade has just been relatively adverse for issuers, right, if you compare it with where it was. So if you look at liquidity, if you look at sort of passive versus active, et cetera, you look at the volatility levels, you sort of say, if you need to, it makes sense. But ultimately, if there's a choice, you evaluate options. Yeah,
and it feels like private companies actually have been doing okay. I don't know whether, again, that conversation has changed over the last couple of years for you.
I mean, ultimately, being a private company, I think, has a lot of benefits. Again, if you're a consumer-facing business and being public actually gives you a massive branding uplift, or if you're a continuous issuer, you need to continue to fundraise, totally different. The capital markets actually work extremely well. But actually, if you don't have those dynamics, being private actually takes away a lot of noise.
Rishi, thank you so much for joining us today. That was Rishi Khosla, there, the co-founder and chief executive of Oak North Bank.